One of the most common tropes you'll hear in America is that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and the country must return to its religious roots in order to restore its glory days. For instance, just take a look at what Donald Trump said at a national prayer breakfast just a few weeks ago.
From the earliest days of our republic, faith in God has always been the ultimate source of the strength that beats in the hearts of our nation. We have to bring religion back. We have to bring it back much stronger. It's one of the biggest problems that we've had over the last fairly long period of time. We have to bring it back. Thomas Jefferson himself once attended Sunday services held in the old House chamber on the very ground where I stand today.
Now, there's a lot to dissect there, including the fact that there are national prayer breakfasts every year. That's a tradition that dates back to the 1950s that I might touch on a bit later. But in claiming that early America was very religious and the nation was founded on these religious principles and that we need to bring back those religious ideas, that's making a historical argument. So as a historian of American religion, I thought I would chime in on at least two crucial points that's related to what Trump said in that video. First, I want to address whether early America was as religious as we typically say, or as is frequently shared in these myths of America founded as a Christian nation. Spoiler, early Americans were not as religious as Americans today are. And second, I want to talk about why invoking Thomas Jefferson is such an ironic and, in the end, complicated person to use when trying to say we need to bring back religion. Let's dig in. But first, we need a bit of context. On the one hand, religion shaped how many in early America, including during the founding period, saw and interpreted the world around them. Religion really was something that shaped society. However, there is a modern assumption that us living in America in the 21st century typically have, in which we connect religious fervor, religious belief, religious ideas with an institutional church or denominational affiliation. That's what Trump is often meaning when we need to bring religion back. We need to give more power to these religious organizations. But religion was understood quite differently in early America, especially during the founding period. So lots of these revolutionaries, these patriots that rebelled against British imperial rule, they framed the conflict in religious terms. Here you see a political cartoon at the repeal of the Stamp Act that shows the bad guys, those who were pushing the Stamp Act, in clerical robes. Because remember, the Church of England was an established church. And you see this as quite common in most of the patriotic literature, including the images and the cartoons that were created. However, this gives a hint to a dimension of early American religiosity that often gets overlooked. That religion was often framed as an individual choice, a personal consciousness. And what they were rebelling against was this idea of a hierarchical rule that was imposed by the state. In other words, an established church like the Church of England. They saw churches and clerical figures, the type of religious individuals that are now being invited to the White House and taking a role in public sphere, as an example of the imperial hierarchical structure that they wanted to tear down. Another point on religious affiliation, the religiosity in the early republic. And that has to do with how many of these early Americans, many of whom believed in a God, many of whom read the Bible, many of them framed their world around religion. How many of those early Americans were actually a part of a church? This is an exercise I often do in my early American history class, where I ask the students, how many of you believe that over 90% of white Americans at the moment of founding were members of a denomination? I'll say over 90%, and I'll get a lot of students raising their hand. I'll say, how about over 75%? A lot of students raise their hands, and I'll say, okay, how many believe that over 50% of Americans were officially affiliated with the church? And a far majority of students will raise their hands. And then I'll show them this image. This comes from a book on the churching of America that shows only 17% of Americans at the time of the Revolution were official members of the church. Now, there's some qualifications that I could give here, right? The numbers can be a bit spotty here, and further, you can be religious without being an official member. Many of the churches at the time operated in a way to where you had to go through a series of steps in order to be considered a full member. And so it just seems likely only 17% of America, or around that, were willing to do that. But that still gives a very different picture than we sometimes assume. And further, what scholars call the disestablishment of religion, or the separation of church and state, which said that we don't want these religious figures to be taking a crucial role in establishing our state, and we want a wall, we'll get to Thomas Jefferson in a bit, between ecclesiastical power and state authority. It's only because of that separation that religions then flourish. Scholars call this the free marketplace of religion. Look at this chart that shows the massive religious affiliation growth that happens following the Revolutionary era, where churches like the Baptists and the Methodists were able to take off because the state left that for the private sphere. So in many ways, when someone says they want to bring back the religion of early America, they're often meaning that we want, religious authorities to have more of a say over our constitutional matters, our politics. But the religion of early America was an oppositional push, saying we want less of that binding of ecclesiastical and political leadership. We want more individual freedom. But when people talk about religion and the founding era, they're often referring to the founding fathers, who are depicted as these devout biblical readers, church attendees, those who wanted to fuse their religious pietism with the new state. So let's take a few minutes and talk about the religiosity of some of these founding figures. I prefer the term framers rather than founders, a term borrowed from legal scholars about the framers of the Constitution, because founding fathers just comes with so much baggage. When we talk about these founding fathers, these framers, something happens in public discourse where we merge them all together. I have a friend who calls this process Founderstein, where we want to create one founding father who they all share the same beliefs, the same background, and surprise, surprise, they match our modern day sensibilities, and they just so happen to have the same politics that someone wants in the public sphere. But the reality was the framers, those who participated in the American Revolution, signed the Declaration of Independence, and then importantly, constructed the Constitution, they were very different. They had diverging perspectives. In fact, within a decade, the same people who construct and defend the Constitution are fighting each other over core interpretations of it. And this is especially the case with religion. Across those elite figures in the early American period, you have a spectrum of a belief with people with a diverging stances on affiliation with church and whatnot. And further, they weren't always, and in fact they rarely were, representative of the general population. So we need to get out of this habit of assuming that these elites of the founding were united and representative of the nation. One of the only things that many of them held in common was a fear of what they called enthusiasm or overwrought religious participation, what we would sometimes say evangelicalism. And rather they saw religion as a form of social control that can bind the nation together through united principles, even if they themselves might not believe. Let me give you a few examples. First, we have George Washington. You have in the rotunda of the Capitol building the apotheosis of George Washington, seen here of George Washington ascending to the heavens, right? One of America's saintly figures. But Washington himself was not a very devout religious individual. He never was a full member of his church. He was not as consistent an attendee of congregations. He was not known to frequently read the Bible or pray in public. He would have his soldiers attend religious worship services, but mostly as a way to combine them together. And he would talk about how he saw religion mostly as a lighthouse, a way to shed the way to a moral destination and to teach morals and values to the general population, while he himself did not really believe all the particulars. You also have someone like Benjamin Franklin, the famed trickster and enlightened mind of early America, who in his early years, it seems quite clear he was an atheist. He wrote several tracts that made it quite clear that he took a very humanistic approach to society. Later on, those views might have been a bit moderated, and he was a self-described deist, where he believes God created the world and then took a step back. Was not a believer in organized religion, didn't really believe in divine intervention in everyday lives. And while some people trot out the instance of Benjamin Franklin asking the Constitutional Convention to open with a prayer one day, it's notable that he himself did not believe prayers played any real part. Instead, he thought that if they could come together and pray, that would be something that would allow them to build commonalities and overlook their differences and be able to do better compromise. He was a constant pragmatist throughout his life. On the other hand, you have someone like Patrick Henry from Virginia, who is about as close to an evangelical religious believer as these framers came. He devoutly believed in God. He was first an Anglican, and then after the Revolution, an Episcopalian. He believed that religious teaching and instruction was crucial to the nation, which is why he wanted an established church in individual states. And he is a representative that some of these framers were devout believers, especially when juxtaposed with others. And then to further complicate things, let's talk about Alexander Hamilton, who, whenever I say the name, I always think of this song, Alexander Hamilton. Anyways, Alexander Hamilton shows how complicated this topic can be, because we have plenty of evidence that early on in his political career, he is, like Benjamin Franklin, a deist. In fact, he seems to express scorn toward organized religion in general, and Christianity in particular, on several instances. His response to Benjamin Franklin saying that we should pray is, I don't think we need any foreign assistance in these domestic disputes. One of my favorite myths of Alexander Hamilton that may not be true, but kind of reflects this persona that he cultivated, was someone confronting him in the streets and saying, how come the Constitution doesn't mention God? To which he responded, I guess we forgot. It is noteworthy that the Constitution was one of the first major political contracts that found a nation that did not expressly draw on divine language. Maybe a topic for another day. And then, of course, we have the always complicated persona of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was in many ways a walking contradiction, or a paradox, which is why one of the best-selling biographies of Jefferson titles him of the American Sphinx. This is especially true in religion. On the one hand, unlike Washington, he attended church frequently. He even served on the local vestry. And yes, he attended services in the Capitol building for religion, as Donald Trump mentioned in the clip earlier. However, he held a deep skepticism of organized religion in general and traditional Christianity in particular. He denounced priests. He denounced ecclesiastical structures. He called the Trinity hocus pocus. He did not believe that there is an afterlife, which is why he tried to create political mechanisms and a written record that could survive death, because he did not believe the soul survived death. And then in one of his most important publications, Notes on the State of Virginia, he, when talking about religion in colonial Virginia in response to European interest in American society, said, I don't care if my neighbor believes in one God or 100. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. A principle that was behind his push for religious freedom. Maybe I'll do a video on religious freedom in the future. The backlash to that statement and his general reputation was enough to where he then became private about his religious beliefs, knowing that they could cause a scandal. Though note this cartoon, political cartoon from presidential campaign that drew on this image of Thomas Jefferson as a threat to the sanctity of American religion that often framed him as an atheist. And then when he was elected to the presidency, he pursued his own personal, private, religious searching that does not really fit our modern definitions of Christianity. He drafted an essay in a syllabus in which he compared Jesus Christ, here you have the opening page of the syllabus, in which he compared Jesus Christ to just a good philosopher like Socrates. And famously, he created his own Bible, the Jefferson Bible, where he purchase 2 Bibles, and he would cut out the passages that he believed were worth saving, mostly the moral teachings, while literally leaving out the miraculous ideas that are in many ways the foundation of American Christianity. And then most famously, he wrote in response to a petition of Danbury Baptists who wanted America to be declared a Christian nation, saying that there needs to be a wall, here's that famous letter, there needs to be a wall between church and state so that both of them can function in their own spheres. And the idea of bringing religion back into the public sphere would have been anathema to Thomas Jefferson. And yes, a few days after he wrote that letter, he attended a worship service held in the House of Representatives. But that was an example of a ceremonial type of religious expression rather than an influential form of religious influence that Jefferson himself despised. Further, I want to say something very quick. Sometimes people go too far on the other end of the spectrum and call Thomas Jefferson an atheist, which he certainly wasn't. He was a deist. And even the term deism, this belief in a non-interventionist God, does not fully capture how he himself saw his beliefs. He saw himself as a Christian, but his definition of a Christian was fundamentally different than how many at the time and today defined Christian. Christian has come to mean something completely different in America, maybe a topic for a future video. So when we're trying to bring back religion and invoking Thomas Jefferson as a Christian in office, we are trying to appropriate figures and ideas that do not really match our present context. The truth is, the modern idea of America being founded as a Christian nation, and what that term Christian nation has come to mean, is a mostly recent invention that came from the post-World War II era, the same period in which these national prayer breakfasts were created. Maybe I'll do a video on that in the future. The phrase is often used as a political tool, and it's often invoking a sense of restoring religious authority in the public sphere that many in early America did not really want. So in using these terms of bringing back religion as a political symbol to curry popular support, Trump is, ironically, drawing on a long-standing tradition in America. It's just not the type of tradition that many are assuming. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, like and share it with others. History has never been more relevant than it is right now, which is why these points of discussion are so important.